So, Joe, I'll leave you to do the introductions for Marc and Rita, but welcome.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Welcome to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to welcome these two. It's wonderful for me to have two winemakers from two different countries that I'm responsible for who are collaborating together. And it doesn't happen very often, so it's a great pleasure. Great to see you two, especially having not seen you in person for so long. You especially, Rita, but I think Marc, I saw you not so very long ago. You were being interviewed by Tim Atkin, right. I think in Amsterdam, which was a fun one. But it's nice to see you in wine country again. That's a good thing. So those of you who have joined us will have probably picked up on the fact that we have just launched a pair of new wines, which are the result of the collaboration between Rita and Marc. And it was thanks to an email that you sent me, Rita, back at the beginning of this year. And it sparked interest immediately when you said, Marc and I are doing something together, and we've just invested in a small winery in the Douro. Be an interesting project as far as I was concerned, based on what I know of you two, and then of course, you know, when I received the samples, that you know very much confirmed it, and it was perfect timing because the wines appear in our the offer that many of you may have seen actually that's out at the moment. So Portugal in a collective offer alongside Italy and Spain, but it allowed me to actually go out and do some shopping, albeit remotely, to find some new things. So it was just perfect timing. And so I'd love it if you would really introduce the project, talk us through it. I've got a few questions that I'm itching to ask, but you may well answer some of those by taking us through it. And I think you've got some slides as well. So why don't we start with that, if we may, and we'll hear your sort of story behind the project, and then we can chat a bit as we go along.
Okay, I'm always the spokesperson and the salesman. I first visited the Douro in 2014, and my friend Dirk Nieport put an itinerary together for me, and I landed up one of the visits. I met great personalities, the guys at Pinhão and Christian van Zella and a few others, and then landed up at Rita's place at Casais de Douro. And we chatted, and Rita had previously made wine with Bruce Jack in South Africa. And anyway, after spending some time at the winery and really enjoying what she was doing, and my colleague Rudiger was with me, who you obviously know well, Joe, and we were just fascinated. You know, prior to this trip, the vineyards of the Mosel, particularly around Bernkastel and Wieland, were for me the reference in terms of spectacular vineyards. But they were nothing until you know, once I arrived in the Douro. For me, it was absolute. It was heaven. So beautiful. And then invited Rita to come back to South Africa, and she came and worked with us in 2015. And I said, okay, but this is a no-pay situation. People with your experience, we can't afford to pay. But what we'll do is you can pick the equivalent of a food row of grapes. So she said, okay, I'll take that block at Porcellainberg, which she did. And she made a bit of Porcellainberg wine, and then I repeated the exercise in 16 and 17. And I brought our whole winemaking team from Boekenhoutskloof out here in, I think it was 16, just for an educational. And they similarly had similar feelings to what I did. And then in 17, I made wine here for the first time along with Rita. We repeated in 18 and subsequently. And over the years, been looking for a little property. And finally, last year, we found something which was suitable, tiny little property with a small vineyard, but in an absolutely great location, about 4 kilometers outside Pinhão, which is kind of, in South African terms, this kind of the Stellenbosch of the wine industry. Well, Pinhão is kind of the epicenter of the Douro wine.
And whereabouts is it in relation to Pinhão?
It's Pinhão. The name of the village is Casais de Douro, so it's very close to Pinhão in the direction of Casais de Douro and the Pesqueira. So direction more kind of Cima Corgo.
Okay.
Yeah. So very close to one of the Ramos Pinto wineries. So, yeah, so a small winery that hadn't made wine for some years, with a spectacular setting, which we're currently renovating. And kind of that's kind of the home to the brands. And yeah, it's exciting times. All the wines we've made thus far have been in Rita's cellar, which is obviously in the Upper Douro Superior. Concerto site, and yeah, it's been fun, and finally able to COVID kind of gave us a chance to kind of accelerate the project and spend a bit more time and you know, start labeling and putting the new facility together and things. So it's been really cool.
Fantastic. So when do you think? Yeah. So this is the new baby, the cellar.
The smallest winery in history.
It looks absolutely stunning, and actually, certainly from this picture, it looks as if somebody was already very smart, and it's kind of built into the hillside. So have you got a natural gravity flow within even that tiny cellar?
Absolutely, with some old lagar still there, and that drain down in. So that's roadside. The front door literally opens. You take a meter out, you're on the road, and you're dead. So it's interesting how the cellar was built. But from the lagar, it drains down into the bottom section where there's still some old pipes and things where they'd made obviously some port in earlier years.
Stunning. And are the vineyards that came with the quinta, are they around the cellar?
Yeah, on both sides. So surrounding it and a little section below the road. Yeah. But we're working with many, with other sites, obviously, within the region.
Sure. That's a stunning picture. It's sort of, well, you have to sit back to get the perspective. It really shows you that the Douro is about mountain viticulture. You know, there's steep slopes.
Yeah, and I think that's what attracted me. I spoke about, I remember as a student winemaker walking up the slopes of the Boekenhoutskloof at Dr. Vineyard, and here some of these sites along the Douro are even more challenging and just, again, spectacularly beautiful. I mean, these are just some photos that we've got from our library of various sites that we're working with. And it's just a real privilege. I mean, today we were sampling. We were going to start harvesting on Friday, actually, and we were in a Rabagato vineyard, the pre-phylloxera. So there's opportunities to work with stunning old vines, you know, low yields, absolute amazing expression, and just for me a real privilege.
And I was looking at your notes on the wines on the website, and for both of them, it talks about a field blend, which is it's a term that I suppose is self-explanatory, but it's not very common in many places in the world. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about that and the tradition, and do you think you'll try and maintain those field blends, or do you think you would over time, as oft as many producers have, move to block planting certain varieties?
Okay, I jump in. So the very old vineyards in Douro, or most of them field blend. People just start planting separately by varieties probably on the 60s, 70s, mostly on the 70s, 80s. That's when people start planting separately. Actually, it's quite interesting because more recently, there's more and more people planting all mixed together. So making co-plantations, which I guess it's a bit more sustainable in a way, because obviously there is some varieties that are more sensitive to mildew or weedium. So when you have them all mixed together, we end up to be a bit more easier on treatments, or it's easier to manage treatments, and you have your yields per hectare are also a bit more constant because of obviously depending on conditions, some varieties adapt better, some adapt worse. So when you have a field blend, they kind of are a bit more constant over the vintage. So obviously it's a different way of doing it. I think that's one of the things that kind of represents Douro, is kind of that kind of special in the red, that you have kind of almost that overripe character with some vegetable character, a herbaceous character, and I think that's kind of which defines basically most of Douro wines, kind of that kind of mixture.
And I suppose as well with, you know, like yourselves with your own vineyards, your family vineyards, Rita, but also other producers, there are lots of grape growers who only have a very small vineyard. So for them, it's a safeguard, isn't it, to have a field blend rather than it tends to be the bigger vineyards that would move to the block planting.
Well, I think it's obviously it depends on the opinions and depends what people try to do. For me, co-plantation makes more and more sense, and I think it's a bit the tradition of Douro. And I think again, it depends on the winemakers and what the feeling is, but I always seem to get better results in the winery, the old vineyards or co-fermentations, and when I do separately and then mix them together. Yes. Right. So.
Mm-hmm. I suppose it's a little bit like, you know, Marc, it's a bit like if you're able to co-ferment different grapes in a blend that you might be making in South Africa, you'll get a different result from fermenting separately and then blending after.
Absolutely, but I think
that's what you want to do.
But I think the beauty here is, you know, obviously as winemakers, when you, like today, you're sampling, you can walk and with local knowledge, you know the different varieties. But when they're picking, you just pick, you know, you go through the vineyard and you pick. So it's not like when we blend from different single cultivars and co-ferment, it's a bit more by design. Here because remember, different varieties have different yields at different vintages. So it's each year, Rita makes a point about, you know, it's a great leveler having all these, it's a bit of an insurance policy actually, having all these varieties together. So some years, some of the varieties probably don't flower as well or have good set. So it's just wonderful. And I think that's the beauty of having this palette here, where the definition, the differences become rather in location rather than actually within the block, because it now becomes an homogeneous blend of different varieties, rather than say, hey, we're going to go and pick their Syrah and Syrah from another block and give different profiles. Here, within the blocks, having these varieties interplanted, the site location now becomes quite fun as your blending palette rather than varieties.
Yeah. I think an interesting part of it is over the years, the field blend kind of operates itself, because obviously if the certain variety doesn't go well there, they end up to pull the ones that adapt better there. So it ends up to be quite getting better over the years as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how have you found working? I mean, you've obviously worked together before, as you explained, both in South Africa and in Portugal.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not unusual to have visitors in your cellar, certainly for harvest, is it? Because that goes on all over the world all the time. It's one of the great benefits of learning about wine, that people move around and get different experiences in different places. But now with your own venture, how has that been? Are you
it's been kind of fun. It's been kind of fun. For me, you know, I was probably a different generation. If you think back to South Africa post-apartheid and the opportunity to travel, Eben and myself, we were in class together, we all kind of had, wow, Eben went and did stuff all over the world. I arrived at Boekenhoutskloof and I've been there ever since. And I'm not great at listening to others, as you know. And so actually 2017 was the first time I'd ever done a harvest in somebody else's cellar. Yeah, and that's after quite some vintages. And Rita quickly reminded me that we weren't in Franschhoek and I was no longer the boss. And yeah, I got briefed again today as we were sampling that, please, you know, remember this is my gig, you know, and you're on the level of everybody else in the winery beyond myself. So yeah, it's good fun.
And I guess it must be fascinating though, you know, working with those different grapes and a wide variety of different grapes as well. to come. And so I've read that you have talked about looking for this particular brand, the Invincible brand, to deliver, if you like, a house style. It'll be an Invincible style. It'll be a recognizable wine, irrespective of the vintage. That's not to say that at this quality level, you're certainly not looking at dumbing down. I don't read that into that at all. Certainly knowing you two as I do, I wouldn't read that into it. But is that so? That's a stylistic approach, is it, that you've discussed and you're aiming for?
Yeah, I think if you look at the two wines too, and those who may know our respective backgrounds, the white is very much a Rita wine. It's fresh, it's lively. The red is very much a Marc style, where it's a bit more rustic, a bit bolder, and I think that's kind of the fun we're having. But another point you mentioned, about presenting the first wines, the obvious thing when people are getting going is you always want to start at the top of the pyramid, and I want to make my mark and have this Uber wine at whatever price, and then kind of filter down. And we thought it would be actually more fun and probably prudent, as we've both done it in our respective businesses. Rita's a star, and we got a great team in South Africa making some great stuff. We thought, let's do something at a more accessible price point, and not say, hey, we want another 80 or 100 euro bottle. There are enough of those currently. Just put something together that says, hey, this is definitely Douro, but there's some real personality, and like you say, a house style. Try and from early on define that. And Rita's far more technical than I am. So the whites is really her game, and here I've come to learn with the reds, particularly the tannin management. Tannins here obviously are way different to South Africa, and that's been the challenge for me, but a great one, and really, really enjoying it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Do you use any foot treading?
We have, but not in these two wines. I was overzealous early on, saying, I want to make wine made in Lagars, but quickly realized that Lagars with varieties that are quite tannic produces a huge amount of tannins for table wine. So my enthusiasm was quickly dampened. Yeah.
So you have to take care. Okay.
Yeah.
And the name of the wine, so I don't know whether not everyone will have seen the bottles, will they? So this is the red. And where is it? Yes. Number 2, numero dos. Explain the rationale behind that, because when you first contacted me, Rita, and you sent me the samples, I thought, oh, well, maybe there was a number 1 that you decided not to talk to me about, and then maybe the next vintage will be number 3, but it doesn't sound as if that's the plan at all.
No, yeah, I see I'm doing all the talking as usual. But Joe, it was very deliberate. The idea is we wanted to enter at number 2 rather than saying Reserva, and then the next quality is a Grand Reserva or whatever.
Yep.
So number 2 is very much it's going to be the mid-tier, and in time we've already got some wine which is not in bottle yet at a number 1 to look to a different audience, to also tell a Douro story with kind of a modern twist. And then whether there's a number 3 or a number 4 when we kind of get to those aspirational qualities later on, I suspect not, but it was more a positioning thing. A number 1 will come later. And then you made reference to the label, the brand's Invincible. Our little company is called, you can say it in Portuguese much better.
Yeah, go for it.
Invincible, which is
Invincible Wine Company. And that was more a bit of a play on the vin for wine, but also, as you know, in Franschhoek, I've got a little wine bar called Invincible. And we thought, these days brand registrations are so tricky. It's not like you wake up and say, hey, I've got a really great concept. There's 30 brands that you try and register before you're successful with one. And it's a bit of a contradiction, because Invincible as a concept is very un-Portuguese. The people have far more humility than to call themselves invincible, or the white to be invincible. So it's a bit of fun. And then depicted on the label is a really nice story. Is kind of in the 1500s, the Portuguese obviously were a great seafaring nation, and they arrived in the Cape before the Dutch. around the Cape of Storms, there was this mythological character called Adamastor who tormented the Portuguese sailors. And that's who's depicted on the label. And the reference of the invincibility of these great, what they refer to as the Age of Discovery, these great Portuguese as a seafaring nation, and a nice tie-in around what was then still the Cape of Storms before it became Cap de Bon Esperance or Good Hope. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of fun, not overly serious. But I think in the wines, it's quite a different story. I think particularly the white, there's real finesse and elegance and a really nice story. And the red, there's the power, I guess, and that's where the Invincible comes in.
So I've got both the white and the red. I'm just going to top up my glass of white because just to talk about it a bit. So this wine to me, and so this is the white 2019 vintage, whereas the red is 2018, 13% alcohol. And to me, it's got a touch of that kind of minerality, even a little bit of struck match character. But because there's so much breadth and depth to the wine, that's just like a little bit of salt and pepper on the wine. I'm not a big fan of that struck match reduction in thin wines, what I would call thin. I'm not a big fan of it in Sauvignon Blanc, for example. Other people are, and I quite appreciate that it's a matter of taste. But what I like here is that there is real substance to this wine, but there's also freshness and energy. So I think it's a delicious drink. I've yet to explore it with food. What does it drink well with?
Rita?
Well, I think I think the idea of wine is to be quite fresh, but also we use old vineyards, so they have quite a lot of concentration. So there is quite a lot of concentration on the palate. I think it's a bit more subtle on the nose, and I think it will pair well with the fish or like the basic stuff, or salads or anything that goes kind of, I don't know, shellfish or fish.
Yeah, I think particularly shellfish, like a nice...
There's a very nice acidity. So.
Yeah. If you know Portuguese cuisine, I just love the arroz de marisco, seafood rice, and you think of with clams and barnacles and that kind of thing. And I think the acidity here just carves it up. It's just beautiful.
And I think it's easy for people to maybe to get the wrong impression about the Douro, because especially if you've been there, it's hot, and of course to make the fortified wines, the vineyards benefit from that heat. But to make this style of wine, you're looking at cooler sites, altitude. I'm sure it's a very different proposition to get that lovely acidity in the wine.
So, well, I think Douro, as you explained, most of it, what people know about Douro is about power and about port wines and red wines. So when we move to white wines, we're becoming a bit more known as well. We obviously go a bit higher in altitude. From it, granitic soils are an important part of it. So from granitic soils, you usually have a bit more acidity, which obviously helps in Douro. And also, I think we're lucky enough to have varieties that well adapt to the place, so they can keep the acidity, in particular Rebigato, that keeps the acidity quite till late in the maturation. So that obviously helps to do what we aim to do, which is a wine with some that looks alive and with like nice and crispy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's about textural qualities as well. There's delicious weight in this wine, although there is an underlying acidity and freshness. There's beautiful texture, nice mouthfeel on it. And that's what I'm so enjoying about it. And just a hint of oak, some older barrique. And again, you mentioned the influence of altitude. And that's where the altitude in the granitic soils, that purity of fruit comes from. And I think it's a wine for cellaring too. I think those waxy terpenes will come in time, but the real now already that richness is the standout for me.
Catherine, have you got a question for us?
I do. I thought now was an ideal time to jump in because it's about the white. So just before we go on to the red, we've had a couple actually. And the first one I'm going to ask, I think, Marc, you might have just kind of answered it. Joe, it's in relation to the description that we've got on our website for the Branco. So this is from John Hughes. He's noted that we describe it as having a mealy character, which, when you consider the other ways we would use mealy as a descriptor, doesn't necessarily sound like it would be particularly nice. So he'd wondered if you could clarify sort of what you mean. I'm presuming it's sort of noting that textural quality to the wine with the mealy character.
It is, and actually it's a very good question and a very good challenge, because often it's quite hard to try and write a note either without being too florid, which isn't normally my bag. Normally my tasting notes are a bit too boring. But sometimes you want to use a term and it doesn't really mean anything to people. We're often told that people don't like us using the word mineral or minerality, but we've stuck with that one because we can't find another way of expressing that mouthfeel and that impression that you get with some wines. So to me, mealy is a positive thing. It's something actually that I find quite often in South African Chenin Blanc. And to me, it's a combination. It often comes with older vines. And to me, it's a combination of texture, breadth, and minerality with some freshness in there as well. And actually, granite is maybe sometimes plays a role here because there's a lot of granitic soil in South Africa. So yes, it's a textural thing, but it's freshness with texture. But actually, if that term is giving the wrong impression, then I'll change the note because I wouldn't want to do that. Sometimes it's really hard in a few words to try and encapsulate a style. And it's interesting, I think there are 3 Douro whites in this particular offer that's out at the moment, and they're all quite different. You know, if you line the 3 up together, they're very different styles. It's a fascinating exercise. One is a different vintage, 2 are the 2019 vintage. You may expect a bit of difference with the one being a younger wine. But yeah, it's absolutely fascinating in a region that's not huge. And all of these wines will come from higher altitude vineyards, but perhaps at slightly different bits of the valley. You do get a different character. Yeah.
And then the second question that we've had, obviously we've touched on the fact that the varieties for this wine work particularly well at the altitude you've got and with the granitic soils, and that it is a field blend. Are we able to kind of talk about what the varieties are? And we've had a question from Val Mason asking, with it being sort of a field blend, does that mean that it's going to change year on year? Or are you kind of looking for an element of consistency with the wine?
I think you mentioned Rabagato at the beginning, but there'll be numerous vines involved, I imagine. To what extent do you know what's in the field blend? I guess that's a question to Rita. Although they look as if they're frozen a bit here. So typically, I'm going to carry on until they come back. There are numerous grape varieties that will be traditional Douro white grape varieties, and they will be complementary. So they'll each have a particular role. So Rabagato is one. There may be Arinto. There may be Covella, there may be, there will be a whole host of different grapes. Some will have more acidity, some will give more body. And it's the blend of the whole, if you like. Encruzado, I've just spotted somebody asked whether Encruzado is likely to be there. Less likely to be in the Douro. It's very much, Encruzado's natural home is the Douro Valley. Although it's kind of spreading a bit through Portugal because it's proved itself to be a very valuable grape. It wasn't one of the core grapes in the Douro, so there may or may not be any Encruzado. Have we had any other?
Sorry.
Good, we've got you back.
We lost connection, I think. I don't know till when you.
Good to have you back, because I was trying to recall my white grapes in the Douro and what might be involved in your field blend.
So most of the mainly it's Rabigato and Códega. Then we also have Folgazão, Donzelinho Branco, and Boal. We'll have also Códega do Lourinho. So that's about 10 different ones. But I would say like maybe 70% of it's Rabigato and Códega.
Okay. Which is quite, that would be quite common across the whites,
Yeah, I guess in some places of Douro you'll see more Códega, in some other places you'll see more Rabigato, so usually more Simacor, you'll have more Códega. If you go a bit more upper Douro, you'll see more Rabigato in the blend.
Okay, yeah, brilliant. And the red, similarly with the red, I guess, you've got multiple grape varieties. Yes,
so it's not such an old vineyard as on the white wine.
No, it's only 50 years old.
Okay.
Yes, there is quite a lot of Tinta Roriz, Touriga Franca, Touriga Nacional, Tinta Barroca, Tinta Amarela. There is in that area is also quite a bit of Ruffet, which is not that common. Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And are any of those Marc, in South Africa, there is a really fantastic and strong initiative to protect the old vines and to guarantee their sort of replication for the future, if you like. Is there anything similar going on in Portugal, Rita, to protect these vineyards?
Well, as I was saying, I think more and more producers are doing their own replications of old vineyards. So they're planting like vineyards together. Like we just planted 4 years ago, 7 hectares co-planted with the 20 varieties, kind of. So we basically plant and then we graft it with our best vineyards. So try to a bit replicate what we used to have, but we're not the only ones. Lots of people are doing that. Yeah. And I would say, I don't want to put numbers on that, but I would say like more than 50% of the great wines from Douro, they will come from if not old vineyards, at least more than 30, 40-year-old vineyards. So, because I think as the region is more difficult and warmer, especially for us that we're not allowed to irrigate, or irrigation is still quite not so easy because of the port. So if you do port, you're not allowed to irrigate. So then you need the vineyards to adapt to the place, and then usually we say it takes at least 20 years. So only after 20 years, vineyards start to show their best.
Okay. So if they've got a head start by grafting in the vineyard, that's a big advantage.
Well, we do that absolutely, but we actually doing that in younger vineyards, so in the new plantations. Obviously, we could do that in like 20-year-old vineyards, but which is possible. But it's always like the cut is always a bit larger, so you risk more infections, and it's always a bit more difficult to graft in the older vineyards.
Okay. Yeah. But at least they're established. I mean, I suppose when you're planting a new vineyard, you're allowed to give that some water, aren't you? Otherwise, it would be almost.
Yeah, in the first years, you are in the first 2 years, yeah. And obviously, you can also irrigate, but you have to ask for a special authorization. And by the time they answer, it's not exactly by the time that.
the joys of being a big winemaker. But I guess even in the Douro, which it's a pretty remote region, but you don't have the same things like power shedding and that kind of stuff that you have to deal with in South Africa sometimes.
Just some internet issues. No, you don't. You don't. But the challenges. I mean, the sites are often so far removed from each other. And like in most countries now, labor and picking, people who actually want to go and pick grapes in these very steep terraces, it's becoming more and more challenging. And your rate of picking is very, very slow. And with the heat and the intensity, I mean, we tasted today, everything is quite different to what it was last week. It can become very, very challenging. You travel far and wide. It's seldom that people have a vineyard centered in one location, and that's the challenge, monitoring those, and then the logistics of actually picking them and getting to the winery at the correct time.
Because although the main routes to get to the Douro are very good now, once you're there, it's lots of little narrow roads, isn't it?
Yeah, but lots of, I mean, it's great for the region and less obviously in the last 18 months. But from my visits here, it's becoming, winery tourism obviously becoming much bigger. And you've got these huge saga tourists, these buses coming, and, the famous bridge to Pinhão, sometimes you could struggle to get across, whereas years ago, it wasn't the case. But but that's also half the fun. For many years making wine in the Languedoc too. It's quite similar in the Roussillon, in some of those little village and mountainous areas. It's quite fun. But the logistics of getting the grapes in great condition in the heat back to the winery is often quite challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have any plans to make a fortified wine?
Yeah, we've got only 3 Lagar in the tiny little winery of ours, and we hope to keep one to make a little port, but it's by no means going to be a focus. I mean, table wines are going to be the focus of the enterprise. Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. And although it's unrelated to the Douro, you've already made a Vineyard, which we have literally just shipped. It's just arrived, and I think we're going to be offering it in a couple of weeks' time as part of a mixed case of Vineyard. But tell us a little bit about that, because that's obviously, it's not so far from the Douro, but it's a totally different project completely. How did that come about?
Well, the brand's called Natural Mystic. So many of your viewers, your members, would have grown up in the Greaties like myself, and will remember that great Bob Marley song, Natural Mystic. And I registered this as a brand years ago. And on Rita's visits to Cape Town, we used to go and eat. It's weird what you do. You take a Portuguese person to a Portuguese lookalike restaurant in Cape Town and drink Casal Garcia, which you would never drink at home. But anyway, and I've always had a fascination with Vino Verde. I find it a spectacularly beautiful region, and I've been interested, other than obviously the big guys, Adelaida and whoever, doing really big brands. I thought it would be an opportunity to do something quite fun that is very, very much Vino Verde. So there's a slight petulance to the wine, but add a little bit of complexity. And there's such beautiful historic branding, these old brands out of Vino Verde, and so many of them. And I thought, let's do something a bit fun. So it's a little bit of fun, Natural Mystic. And we worked with a friend of Rita's there, João, that's all he does is make vino. But actually, no, he doesn't. He makes a bit of wine in Douro as well. And we went and said, please, can we make a little parcel? And for me, that was more just as a bit of an add-on. And as for me, it has been a bit of a fascination. I love the region. I love the wines, and just as you all know, it's a summertime wine. There's nothing beats a nice chilled bottle of Vino Verde, lowish alcohol, slight bit of residual sugar, and that little bit of petulance. So yeah, that's been a lot of fun, and really the markets responded wonderfully to it.
Excellent. I mean, Vineyard seems to be going really well here in the UK, although the summer seems to have left us for a few days, but we're promised a bit more summer weather in the next week or so. So hopefully the email will be well timed. But no, it must be a lot of fun. You need something for your aperitif anyway.
Yeah, but for me, it's a bit like, for the last 20 odd years, or probably longer, Joe, that we've been talking about the Riesling revival. We're all still waiting, and us wine geeks just continue to enjoy it. And it's a bit, for me, as a real outsider, it's a bit like that with Vinho Verde. I think there's a lot of missed opportunities, and the market's ready for, as a category, you think of the wines of Luis Solera. He's making spectacular wines at obviously significantly different quality levels to ours. Ours is very much sort of entry, but with some sophistication. It's a blend of 3 varieties. But I think the opportunity for Vinho Verde is now. I think it's a great proposition that's really been undervalued.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Okay, so I'm just wondering, Catherine, do we have any questions in the from our audience that we should be answering that we haven't already covered?
We don't have any at the moment, other than sort of a bit of interest in the red wine. If you're able to talk about the Tinto a little bit. I know, obviously, members, it does show that it's out of stock, but we do have some more coming in, don't we, Joe?
We do indeed. Yeah, we were chatting about this just before we went online, and one with the whole situation we find ourselves in, and the fact that we've completely changed our approach to our the way we've put together our sales program and launching something completely new. It was a real finger in the air to guess how much we might need. And certainly as far as the red's concerned, we already know that we under-egged it, but luckily Rita has some more stock available in Portugal. So we will be shipping some more, but it will have to come from Portugal. So it's not going to be here immediately. But if you have missed out and would like to try it, then there will be more to come, I'm delighted to say. So tell us a little bit about the wine. How is the red made? What is the approach in terms of the red? It's very, to me, you talked about the tannins that you've met in the Douro, Marc. To me, this wine has beautiful tannins. It's got some tannin grit, but it's also got some lovely texture to it as well. How have you achieved that?
Well, as I said, in the intro, the white wine is very much Rita's department. She's probably one of the best white wine makers in Portugal. And with the red, for me, it was very much my little project. And it wasn't the first red I've made here, but the challenge was really about the tannin management. It's so easy to over extract. And here we were very cautious. As I wanted to only make red and Lago and learned very quickly that it wasn't that simple. So it was made in inox or stainless, but with a nice regime, but not pumping over as regularly, as extracting as much as I would have done in South Africa. And also being very careful at pressing. The press fraction only adding back at the final assemblage. And also, these wines don't need a lot of sophisticated new oak. There's enough going on. So it's an older oak. I think it was 16 or 18 months in barrique, and then assembled and then bottled. But I love it because it's a combination. For me, it's very much a kind of new world, old world thing. There's some power of the new world, but there's some real elegance, underlying elegance, particularly in the tannins of the wine. There's certainly a boldness, make no mistake, but there's spice, there's aromatic, and again, just really nice underlying tannins. And I think this one's going to lay down well. I think, especially now as things start to get cooler, you're going to start wanting to drink a bit of this red. I think it's got a real warmth to it, and I think that's for me the difference between the two. Where Rita's precision with the white, this is very much a rustic. And if you think of our kind of signature house style in South Africa with our Boekenhoutskloof range, this is very much a wine that I like to make. I've been, the last years I've been quite introspective and wondering whether I should be making more hipster wines, 12% Cinsaults and things like this. And every time I come back to say, hey, this is what I've been doing for 20 years and this is what I want to continue doing, So, yeah.
I think I can certainly see that as winemakers, you're going to be drinking a lot of your own wines. You want to be enjoying what you drink. So yeah, I can totally get that. But yes, that combination of both of your experiences is creating something. Well, it's totally unique. It's a different expression. This wine is very different from the other Douro Reds that we have at the moment. But you can still get some of that Douro fruit and some of that Douro structure coming through. I'm sure I will have underestimated the keeping potential. It's always when you have something new, you're kind of cautious at the beginning.
Yeah.
The wine is very accessible now.
Yeah.
Lovely fruit, but I think you're right. I suspect it'll probably last a long time. I must try and make sure I put some bottles aside so that we can actually test the theory, because
I think my point today is just that it's again, we must remind ourselves that we're at a kind of a mid-tier here, but there's enough going on there to suggest there's some cellaring potential. I think to your point, it's accessible now, but there's enough tannin, there's enough grip to let that wine sit for some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Catherine, have you got a?
Yeah, so that actually leads us quite nicely into the first question that we had lined up. So it was a question about the drinking window, Joe, from Keith Cooper, asking, obviously we've advised the drinking window up to sort of around 2028, and then asking sort of when you would maybe expect the wine to peak. And I suppose if we've just talked about the fact that it does have the ability to lay down for a little while, it's got the structure, it's got the tannins, what sort of development are you kind of expecting or hoping to see? How, after a few years, how changed do you think the wine would be in sort of in the flavour and structure?
Well, not having history, I mean, we worked with this vineyard for a couple of years, but I think the window to 2028 is fine. But again, to qualify that it's a mid-tier, and we actually want you to buy the next vintage because we just about sold out on this one. so no, that's my commercial hat. But no, again, there's enough going on here, and provided you've got the right cellaring conditions, I think that's spot on. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, the wine will start really opening up and a bit more lively and be drinking beautifully. But there's enough to suggest it'll go further than that.
Mm-hmm. I've recently tasted some wines from the 2011 vintage, which admittedly was a powerful vintage.
Yeah.
And it's also a vintage where the red wines were made, many of the red wines, table wines, were made in a more powerful way in those earlier years, only 10 years ago now. But we kept back a little bit of stock that we are just shortly, I think, going to re-release. And it was fascinating tasting those wines again. I had completely underestimated the drinking window potential of those wines. So for all of them, we've now extended that window. Again, I've had to guess at what I think that should go to. But it has really shown that, 10 years for quality Douro Reds is easy. 20 years for many of them is also going to be easy. So it's going to be really fascinating to watch. And I think sometimes because we've been enjoying Douro Reds for a few years now, we forget that it's still, in any kind of volume terms, it's still a relatively new category. There've been fabulous Douro red wines for decades, but not many of them. But now we have a wide selection of those wines available. And it's only now that we're starting to see, okay, well, what do those wines do in bottle? How do they develop? And many of those wines had barely changed. A lot of them had a lot of oak at the beginning, and there was still some oak now. Whereas what I like about this wine is that it expresses the fruit. The oak is there to help frame the wine and support the wine, but it's not in any way overtaking the fruit. Some people like a lot of oak, but I think in the Douro, you've got such gorgeous fruit aromas and flavors that the older oak, to me, seems like a sensible a sensible route, unless you're really aiming super premium, super long-term investment.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there, Joe. Yeah, these guys, again, there's enough 80 to, we were talking today, some guys even pitching well over 100 now. And those are marks with, really beautiful oak, and in some cases not, now then amphora is as sexy as new oak, so, so but yeah, I think, oak is just really a vehicle for slow oxidation and assisting with the tannin maturation.
Yeah, also in Douro, the evolution of especially the red wines are a bit different than Bordeaux. So I think for the first 5 years, almost the wine, especially the greatest years, the 5-6 years, the wine doesn't change at all. It seems like it's like exactly the same as you put it in bottle, and then starts like developing, and probably then it develops a bit faster than some other region as Bordeaux. But it seems like it's very fruity and almost like especially 11, as you say. It seems like it's like the first 8 years the wine almost didn't change, and now it's starting getting some other aromas finally.
Yes, yeah. Rita, have you been able to keep any reference bottles from some of your earlier vintages from Conceito?
Well, not as much as I would like, but yeah.
It must always be the case, I suppose.
Well, we're a bit more careful now than we used to with the older vintages. I think it's something that you learn as producer as well. Also, in a way, because you learn, and the other way you have less pressure to sell, and also because the facilities to keep it is they also improve. So I think it's a combination of those three. But yeah, but I also think like as when you know the vineyards better, we do a better job. So I think we're doing a better job today than we used to do 10 years ago, like in general as a region, but also us as producers.
I think because inevitably some of the early red wines were probably made with grapes that were perhaps they were worked in the vineyard for port, or they were taken from vineyards for port. So you're not going to end up with the same result as if you have a vineyard that is selected for red wine or planted for red wine, and pruned in the vineyard for red wine and picked at a different time, and all of those things. You're going to end up with a very different result. And I think that's why we're just seeing more and more interesting and exciting reds from the Douro, because people are making them with red wine in mind first.
I think it's two reasons. One of them, most of the people that start doing the wines or the table wines in Douro, they were kind of port winemakers. So they very focused on color, concentration. That was very, very important. And obviously then it started changing a bit. And so basically now also, as you say, in the vineyards, people like the low vineyards more near the river with more ripeness, they go mainly to port, and then the higher mid-altitude vineyards, they go to table wine. It kind of makes sense as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Have you got another one for us, Catherine?
I do, yes. So
you're loitering with intent there.
I am, I'm just hovering. This is a question from Nick Cooper, and it's for yourself, Rita. He's asking whether you can sort of make a comment or a sort of a comparison between the 2018 and the 2019 vintages in the Douro, whether there's anything of note to comment on between the two vintages. 18
and 19. Mm-hmm. So I would say 18 is very, very good. 19 was a bit more challenged. So it was very hot at the end of the cycle. So like for white wines was fine because we peaked before, it was a big wave of hot in the, I think it was end of August, beginning of September. So basically on the reds, basically the maturation stopped, and then it was lots of especially the red vineyards were really struggling with the stress and lots of they had not enough leaves, and the maturation was more about dehydration than really maturation for the red. So 18, if you compare 18 and 19 on red, I would say 18 is a bit more balanced in a way, and 19 is a bit more full-bodied, a bit more like big wines. That's how I would compare it.
Perfect, thank you. And obviously the picking for this vintage is starting soon in the next few days. So how's that looking in terms of the grapes, and what are you expecting from this vintage?
Well, honestly, we just started going to the vineyards a week and a half ago, and so far it's looking absolutely amazing. Honestly, as I was saying, the last 5-6 years, although the results in the bottle and the results on the tanks were looking absolutely, in general, quite good. We've been quite very good years in Douro, almost like since like 11, only 14 was a bit, not as good, but we've been having quite lucky in terms of quality. But usually you have a bit more imbalance in the vineyards. Right now, the vineyards are looking absolutely great. So we're expecting, and we have more acidity at a higher ripeness of maturity. So you have like already quite nice tannins for a lower alcohol, which usually it's a bit tricky. So usually the challenging in Douro is to have acidity and ripe tannins at the same time, because sometimes the acidity goes down very quickly and alcohol. So that's a challenge. So far, the things are looking quite nice. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Now you talk. I mean, we spoke earlier about 19, and just for the members, when you have these heat waves, it's not like the ripening accelerates. Everything just literally shuts down, and then it battles. The vines actually battle to recover. So it's been warm but moderate warmth, and that's why we're seeing such beautiful ripeness in the grapes and still the preservation of acidity. So I think it's going to be a really, really great.
Also, we had more rain than usual, so we still have the soil still have some
reserves.
Water reserves, which helps to keep the leaves and helps the maturation.
But particularly in the really, really old vineyards, I mentioned a pre-phylloxera Rabigotto vineyard that we're in earlier today. There's very little canopy, so it's important in vintages that are when there is a nice balanced kind of ripening season, those bunches just get so much more protection and look that much better when they come into the winery.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Exciting.
And then I think the final question that we've got, and we've touched on slightly, obviously, between the fact that historically the Douro is very much port focused, but now is heading a bit more towards the table wines, and particularly yourselves, the focus on table wines. The question is, what sort of percentage of red grapes go into table wines in the Douro, and is it something that's increasing? Is it becoming more common for new winemakers or winemakers that are setting up new lines of production to go straight to table wine, whereas historically it would have been for port and fortified wines?
Well, there is more boundaries to get into port wine than in table wine for obvious reasons. So if you want to aim to be a port wine producer, you need more time. So basically, when you talk about be a table wine producer, after 1 year you can have a white in the market. After 2 years you can have a red in the market. If you want to aim to be a port producer, the only thing you can have in the market after 2 years is a vintage port, and after 4 years an LBV. And if you want to launch 10 years down, you have to wait around 10 years. So it's obviously you need more capital to become a port wine producer than to be a table wine producer. That's why the port wine scene has been slightly changing, but the biggest players are still the same that they used to be. I think the port consumption is being decreasing slightly. The good news is the quality has been increasing, so the value is being on the last years picking up a bit. And obviously the table wines, I don't have the numbers for the last couple of years, especially with COVID. I don't know they were. But obviously there is more and more producers on the table wines in Douro. So I guess when I started making wine, it was about 100 producers. Now we're probably talking about 800 just in Douro about table wine. So it's obviously some people just produce like 2,000 or 3,000 bottles, but it's more easier to produce table wines and port wines because of the boundaries at the entry.
And with the, you know, with the reception that the wines have had, and with the, you know, the many exciting wines that we're seeing coming out of the Douro, is it attracting more people back to the valley? Marc touched on the big challenge of actually finding people to work, particularly in the vineyards, because it's really hard work. Is that something you're concerned about for the future, or are you seeing a bit of a return? Are younger people coming back to Portugal and to the vineyards?
Well, well, I think in the last 2 years, it kind of became a bit more stable. At least it was not less people, but it's still a problem. So obviously it's quite it's less opportunities in Douro. Also, I think it's quite far away, although the roads are getting much better in Portugal, but also for younger couples that aim to live in Douro. Sometimes the schools for kids are also not, you don't have that much options that we have in the cities, obviously. And there is a few challenges regarding people to work in the vineyards. If you look to the average age of the people working, you would find out that it's quite scary in a way, because they're all in their 50s, most of the vineyard workers. So most of the younger people, they don't really want to work in the vineyards. They prefer to go to the cities and try to, you know, other stuff. Obviously, working in the vineyard is quite, in the winter it's very cold, it's very hot in the summer, so it's quite a difficult, it's quite a difficult job, obviously. But obviously, it's also easier to mechanize today than 20 or 30 years ago. So what people are doing is mechanize as much as possible in a way. And yeah.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. And I suppose there's this boom in wine tourism in the Douro, which is, it's very important for the region, and it's obviously bringing a lot of income to the region. But of course, that will attract some people who might have worked in the vineyards or the cellar. They're going to now work in the hotel or the restaurant, because that's, even if it's hard work, it's not as hard work as working out in the heat in the vineyard. So yeah, there are so many challenges always, aren't there? But luckily the results that you're producing are exciting enough. We just hope that will encourage enough people to come and work there with you guys. It's exciting stuff. So, well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to hear about it. Actually, we should show a picture, because at the moment, all the while you're refurbishing the beautiful little old cellar that we saw, you're making these wines at your cellar, Rita. So I think, Gil, we've probably got a picture of that beautifully stylish cellar, haven't we? That so that's the long view, which is very respectfully located in the heart of the vineyards. And then I think there's a very stylish modern cellar. So you've got all the right equipment, Rita, to make these wines in a nice in a good environment. Oh, yeah, which is great. When do you think the new old cellar will be ready?
Hopefully next harvest.
Hopefully next harvest. It's not that big.
So it should be an easy job.
The real challenge is it's right in the heart of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So planning permission and things it's taken a long time. So, but we hope to be there soon to start the refurb.
And is the idea to keep the same footprint or expand a little bit?
1130 square meters, so just for put the chiller and stuff. So it's really more or less we keep the same.
Yeah, and this is very much the home of the brand. We look for other opportunities as well, and cellar space obviously, and currently looking at vineyards within close proximity. So that was very much, hey, this is a fun start, you know, and
absolutely.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool.
Absolutely. Can't wait to get out and see it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know, Catherine, before we close, I don't know, are there any more questions that we need to answer?
No, that's everything
Okay.
that's brought up. We've covered it all. So thank you very much, both.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, you two. It's been really great to see you, and thanks so much for telling us about the exciting new project. Can't wait to taste the new vintages, but delighted that we're starting so well with these. And very best wishes for the harvest. Keep in touch. We'll look forward to hearing all about that in due course.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
And thanks to your members for joining us today.
Right. Great to see you. Thanks all, and thanks Tastings team for all your hard work behind the scenes.